The Trainer 121 podcast is proudly sponsored by Financial Planning Matters. We recently recorded a latest episode with the founder of Financial Planning Matters, Niall O'Connor. In the episode, we talk about a couple of the basics of what the services they provide do, ways to get in contact, and just various stories about managing your financial future. Here is the thumbnail, and you can find the link for that video in the show notes below. The following is a conversation with Willie Boland, who is the current Director of Coaching at UCD Mount Merrion. Willie isn't a household name per se when it comes to Irish football, but as we discussed at the start of the podcast, he actually has the most appearances in the Premier League and First Division in the UK without having a senior Irish cap. So the vast experience that Willie has in professional football from when he signed for Coventry at 17 all the way through to when he had to finish his career at Hartlepool. It's a vast experience of dealing with the Premier League, League One, League Two, and then also playing with the likes of Eric Cantona and then Gianfranco Zola. We also talk about Willie's coaching experience and after his playing career at Hartlepool, having taken a Category 1 coaching role at Middlesborough post Hartlepool, and then coming back to Ireland to take director of football roles at Limerick City, and then to his current role at UCD Mount Merrion today. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. Thank you very much for listening. I think I would be a fool not to acknowledge Shane Lorich and say that Willie's main stat is the...
How does he get a message out?
I know.
He gets to mention everywhere he does.
He does. Too many. But if I'm not mistaken, if I get this right, the most top division appearances in England without an Irish senior international cap.
Yeah, the boys love that one to do from a bantering point of view because it's what they've got against me all the time and they love it. The fact, I never got an international cap and they just love the fact I never got an international cap. And that people make a meal of it as well, and they love telling me all the players that got international caps and who were apparently not great players, and I didn't. So listen, great, well done, guys. Nice bit of banter. Keep it going. Not a bother at all. I can take it on the chins, like no issue. But it's a contentious little bit of banter that the boys get, which you have to just put up with, that's part and parcel of it.
Is it a true story that Shane heard that statistic in a pub quiz and then was joyful knowing that he had the answer?
I think it was something along those lines, and he was very quick in making me aware of it as well. The good thing about what we got going down at UCD Mount Merrion is that all the coaches are pretty close, and even from a social point of view, we do go from time to time and have a catch up, especially at the end of the week after the games are done. And there's always a bit of banter flying around, and that's one of the main goalposts when they're struggling.
So, to play in the First Division in England, for a lot of the younger listeners, that is the Premier League. It's the top tier in English football. Can you talk a little bit about before that? So what was it like playing in Ireland? Where did you start the love of football? Where did you play in this country? And then eventually, how did you make that move across?
Yeah, so like anybody, start really young with a football, and I loved it right from the very start. That was my main sport. It was the only sport I really played. Started when I was 6 years of age, played for my local team down in Limerick Kennedy Park, and then moved on to Crew Park when I was under 14. In relation to, I was playing in probably not one of the stronger teams in Limerick, but I stayed with them for years because that's what you did back then. I wouldn't have been prominent. I wouldn't have been one of the stronger players going up through the ages. Then at under 12, under 13, I started to develop a little bit. I did grow quicker as well. I probably got to the height I am now when I was about 13 years of age. So that probably had an influence on the impact I was having in games as well from the physical side of things. So I played with the Kennedy Cup team then in Limerick, and that's when you start to get noticed, from an international point of view. So they bring you up on trials, they pick players from each city. The form of the Mill Cup, the Kennedy Cup back then was you wouldn't meet and play in the one tournament, you'd play every week. So
cool.
So they would. That's how old I am. So that's how I first got selected for Irish trials. And once you get in that environment, you have more exposure, obviously, to scouts. So I got selected then for, surprisingly enough, I got a letter through the door and got selected for the Irish under-16s before I got selected for the Irish under-15s, playing a year up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was confusing because I thought it was a mistake, and I didn't know I was going to go into under 15s. But yeah, I got selected to go to, I think it was Denmark and Norway at the time when I was still under 15, to go and play with the under 16. So that was very quick, like from under 14s, really coming to prominence and being a stronger player in the city. All of a sudden, within 6 months, getting your first international cap at under 16 level was quite a jump in a small period of time. And then trials over in England happen with the scouts. They ask you over. So I went on trial to Everton, Aston Villa, Coventry. Supposed to go on trial to Man United, but I had to cancel it. They're my team, my boyhood team, but I had to cancel it because there was an Irish camp on at the same time. Never got the opportunity again. Not that it would have made much of a difference because I'm the same age as the likes of Scholes, Giggs, and all those guys.
Right.
Yeah, so,
Class of 92?
Yeah, class of 92, I don't think so. But it was nice to have actually maybe have had that opportunity to do so. And I decided to sign for Coventry at the time. I was offered by all 3 clubs to go and sign for them.
Oh, wow.
And my decision was based on, at the time, a number of things. There was a lot of Irish boys over at Coventry at the time, which I knew from the Irish setup. I'd been over there a couple of times. I just had a good feel for the place. And when you weighed up the clubs themselves, you look at yourself and think, I know it's probably ambitious at the time, but you're thinking, what's the best opportunity of me getting first team football? But I mean, you're a million miles away from that when you first go over, but it is a factor that you should consider before making that move. So that was it. It was Limerick Kennedy Cup, Irish trials, exposure to scouts, because you wouldn't get them down in Limerick much. It was mostly Dublin based that the scouts were, would go and watch games because it is the strongest league in Ireland, and it has been for a long time. So being a country boy, it's more difficult to get into that Irish setup, and once you do, that's when you get exposure to the scouts. And I signed at the time a 2-year pro contract for Coventry, and that was my first step into the English game then at the age of 17.
Yeah, that's so young. Did you think at all stages when you hit, let's say, the Irish 16s trial, that you were going to be a professional footballer, or was there any other career paths that you were even looking at?
No, I never thought I'd be a professional footballer at any stage.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't. It wasn't at the forefront of my mind. I knew what I was achieving was really good for my age, playing a year up, and I had a good season with the under-15 Irish team, and I won that award that they give out, the Player of the Year award thing.
Oh,
so
cool.
I knew I was doing okay, I was doing well. But you still don't really believe it. It's just then when the interest comes from the clubs, you think, oh, hold on a second, this could actually happen. Like, I never really got carried away with it. It's not part of my nature anyway. I'm quite laid back and grounded, probably because of the family life I had and the friends that I had at the time. They definitely keep me grounded. But it's important as well that you don't get too carried away. A huge thing for me as well was my parents didn't put any pressure on me. My dad wouldn't really come and watch games, so you're never looking over your shoulder, because you see quite a lot now with kids, and you hear some stories, some of them horror stories about what parents are saying to kids and information they're given. Totally understand parents, they want the best for their kid, but I feel and I felt at the time that being able to play without having that added pressure of trying to please your own mum or your dad, normally dad, that it certainly helped me anyway. Everyone's different, but it certainly helped me not having that added pressure of a parent on the sideline.
And let's say in Coventry and even with Everton and Villa, what is a trial environment like when you're an Irish kid coming over to the UK? Is it players where they're coming from all across Europe, just the UK, or do you even remember what that felt like?
Yeah, I think back in my time, this is early 90s. Which is a long time ago now, obviously, and things have moved on and changed an awful lot, especially with the Brexit coming in now.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have had that opportunity back then. It was they'd bring you over. They'd normally bring you over for a week, where you are dependent, because of school and stuff like that, would depend on the time of the year. But they'd bring you over to train with the team, with the U team at the time, and they'd always try and fit in a game for you on the Saturday as well. Normally fit it in when there's a home game, so you can go and watch the game, so you can see the whole environment and get a feel for the place. Sometimes you might go over, you might train with the reserves. It depends on where they actually seen you or what they thought of you. But my trials at the time would have been training with the youth team, being around the environment, watching first team training, going to first team game, playing with the youth team on the Saturday. And literally only went over to Coventry once, went over to Aston Villa once, went over to Everton once, and after each one, it's set in the meeting with the head of youth, and they offered me to sign there and then. So that was like, for me, that was obviously great to have those, choices to go and sign for clubs. But like I said here at the start, Coventry just felt the right one for me. I also had relatives only lived like 15-20 minutes away from Coventry as well. So I'm thinking, mum and dad can come over, stay at cousins, I can go and just visit them at the weekend, and that helps a lot as well. There was also the environment in Coventry, which I thought at the time was a really good one, where all the players within the youth team would stay in the lodge. So it's like a Sky Blue Lodge. So even lads who lived in Coventry would have to stay there throughout the week. And it kind of builds up a good connection and camaraderie within the boys there. And it's good for boys from Ireland, Wales, Scotland, north of England, all living under the same roof. And it helps kind of like interacting, helps socially as well. Because I personally, and I know a lot of kids who went over to England and even still now get homesick very, very quickly because it's different. You're missing your mum, you're missing your mum's cooking, your dad, you're missing your friends, you're missing, being the big fish in a situation as well.
Of course,
there's a lot of things that you would miss, and it's very difficult initially. So a lot of those things I felt played into helping me settle in a lot easier, and I think they're very important. I do know that clubs, they definitely pay more attention to stuff like that, kids coming over, because they've had the experience of over a year. So there's a lot more player care involved to make them feel settled and to make them feel at home.
Yeah, interesting.
How did it progress then from there? So how different was it back then with, like now it's like you've 23s and whatnot. When you said youth, is that under 18s?
Yeah.
And then what is the kind of progression from that? How did you get into the first team then?
Under 18s to reserves. That's it. All of a sudden you're playing youth team football, and your next step up is playing against men. So you're into that situation a lot quicker. Can totally understand the under 23 because you're trying to bridge that gap, and it's probably similar to moving our national league under 19s, under 20s, just to try and bridge that gap to get players more time before they get into first team situation. So you'd play with the youth team every Saturday, and you could still play with the reserves depending on how well you were doing. They're normally midweek games, and a lot of those games would have been high tempo, very competitive, because you're playing against senior pros, and a lot of it might have been senior pros coming back from injury or lads who were out. There's a right mixed bag back then, but the tempo of the games and it was more realistic to first team football than what I've seen in the under 23s when I was over at Middlesbrough at the time. The pace of the game was definitely different, and it was a lot more near to first team football playing reserve team football. But I can totally get why they've reverted to under 23 football as well. Interesting.
When you first went into Coventry, in and around the first team environment, so let's say reserve team, I'll just say men's football, just to categorise the two of them, was there anything on the personality side that you thought was very interesting with senior players? Because like a senior men's football is much different to like your mates in the academy, for example. So even just like away from like how fast the game was now physical, what was it like dealing with older personalities for the first time versus people your own age?
I know it's a very good question, and it's a huge thing as well. It's that jump up from having a bit of banter and crack. Because, I mean, dressing rooms in football are unforgiving places. You sink or you swim in there. Like, you're under pressure straight away, even what clothes you're wearing coming into training. It's like, but what you do is you do learn very quickly to have a sharp sense of humour. And you have to become witty in that environment, or else you'll just get slaughtered. What you don't want to be doing is wearing a ridiculous piece of gear, something like you wear sometimes, Gary.
all the time.
He came for it.
I knew it was coming as well.
You don't want to be wearing a ridiculous bit of gear, because straight away you're giving ammunition to the whole group.
Of course,
you will get slaughtered. Like, things will be hanging up off the roof. You go out and all of a sudden you come back and why is that hanging up there? But getting back to the question from the personalities point of view, you're going from that into a really more senior, severe dog-eat-dog world, because a lot of these senior pros are looking at you as a threat as well, because you're going into that situation and that environment, and you're looking to take their place, and they're looking at you thinking, if you think you're taking my place, you've got another thing coming. So you got to earn the respect first and foremost, and you earn that by, you know, not getting carried away with yourself, making sure that you're keeping your head steady, you're concentrating, you're working hard, you're respectful to the senior pros around you, and they'll smell a player who, you know, actually fancies himself without actually having achieved anything, and they'll take him to the cleaners in so many different ways, whether that's like getting stuck into him in training and showing him, you know, not helping him as well if he thinks he's getting too carried away. If you have the right attitude and the right manner about you, you'll get a lot more support from that unforgiving dressing room, and eventually you'll earn the respect, but only after, you know, you've shown the respect and the due respect that you should do to senior players, because they were in your position once and they had to work hard to get into that position. And they'll certainly want to see the same thing from you. And I think once you do that and you get in there and you play and you work hard and you're listening and you're trying to learn, they'll then help you along. And for the most part, they want young kids to be successful and do well, because it's going to benefit the team in the long run as well.
Yeah, and it'd probably be difficult to give a synopsis of it now, but do you reckon at the core, the Premier League First Division senior dressing room is the same as it was back in the 90s, or do you think there's a big shift?
So different now.
Yeah.
So different. I mean, I doubt if there's any banter anyway or anything like. It's so, I mean, the game's come so far in the last 15, 20 years from so many aspects. You know, there's so many different departments in football clubs now, whereas, I mean, we barely did any video analysis when I was playing first team football in Premier League. It was like unheard of. You'd have a flip chart and you'd have the opposite team 11 and the manager would go through them. That would be it. You'd do your set pieces on the Friday and you'd remember them, and you'd be given your jobs then on the Saturday, who you have to mark and that. Now everyone's got an iPad, they've got a performance analysis, they've got S&C,
Yeah, 100%.
all that sort of stuff now. And I think also the approach of games as well is a lot more methodical and a lot more tactical. Whereas years ago it was a little bit more off the cuff. It's nowhere near the amount of football that's played now, tactical awareness that you need. Technically, players are a lot better now as well. Years ago it was more cut and thrust, direct football, rather than playing through the thirds. It was second balls, get the ball forward into the strikers. 4-4-2 was the go-to formation back then. You normally have two strikers up there. If you look at all the teams that won leagues, that always play with two men up top in the 90s. And then I think the European influence of the likes of Wenger and all those guys, he started bringing in the dietary side of things and to give his team the edge. Then you've got all these other great managers coming along. Obviously, your Guardiola's and Klopps now are bringing it to different levels. Yeah, so different. I think the personalities would be even different.
Yeah.
I also think that there's less, even if you look at our young footballers that we're developing now, for me, if you look at them, they're not as hardy or as, like, from a character point of view, as strong as they would have been back then. But it's a different type of football now. It's a different type of player. And that's what you have to look out for and look at and manage as well.
Yeah, definitely. What did you really like about Coventry in your earlier days? Because from my opinion, and even just from knowing you for the last couple of years, and even from this conversation, is that, like, obviously you survived that initial dressing room period. You had a very successful career at Coventry within the First Division. What did you really think you'd done well at, and what did you enjoy doing as a young player in that dressing room?
Well, I mean, the one thing I always had was I had a steely determination to do well, and I worked extremely hard, and I would be definitely a team player, so that I would certainly be embraced by those senior pros because of those attributes. I felt at Coventry, I never really felt a regular. I was there for 6-7 seasons in the Premier League and only played, I don't know, between 60 and 70 games. That's not regular material. What I really enjoyed was the experience of, you know, playing against some of the world's greatest players at the time. I never felt really that I was a starting 11 player at Coventry. I always felt like I had periods where I'd play. There was a couple of seasons where I played 20 odd games, but never really consistently held down a place for long enough periods to say, yeah, I did really well there. So maybe being realistic and honest about it, maybe it wasn't my level. and maybe I had to, realise that, my goal scoring record wouldn't have been the best either from a midfielder point of view, and you got to chip in different things. So what I enjoyed was the fact that the different experiences I had, playing in all these wonderful football grounds against these wonderful teams, playing international football as well, obviously not senior as Shane keeps pointing out, but the whole experience of it and being involved in that first team setup and the experience of it all was brilliant. Like, it's something I'd never dreamed of, and like I said from the start, I never thought I was going to be a professional footballer. So it was an amazing experience. And the other thing that's so different now is the social side of things as well. You'd go and have a couple of beers during the week with your teammates on a Tuesday night or on a Saturday after the game, whereas players wouldn't really do that now at all. It wouldn't be seen of. So even from a social point of view, it was great crack, good laugh with the lads, playing football, playing in the Premier League. It was like any young fella's dream, but didn't really hold on to a first team place for as long as I could have done. But I was happy enough with how it performed for the most part when I did play.
Mm-hmm. How tough was that then? Like, in that moment, maybe looking back now, you can kind of be grateful for playing at that level. But was there times where you might have played for a couple of games and you found it tough to just go in and train? Or, and this could be the difference between nowadays with players, where you hear when players don't get in a team nowadays, it's like, right, the agent rings up and why isn't he playing? Whereas, because that social aspect probably isn't in modern football. Yeah. Was that actually a big part, do you think, of keeping you, I don't know, connected with the group, even though you mightn't play for, let's say, a couple of weeks?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I had going for me was I'd keep my head down and I'd keep working hard. I wouldn't sulk about things, and I don't feel like I should have, because if I was performing well enough, then you play. You play week in, week out. I mean, there's some really top players that were brought to the club who would play in my position, and you're talking about international players here. So you've got to look at it realistically as well, like where you're at, and what you're doing and how you're impacting the game when you're getting in there. So I'd always say that players really should be looking at themselves first and foremost, without looking for any sort of excuses about, the manager doesn't like me, or prefers that player, or I thought I played well, I thought I did this. And I think it's a huge learning tool for young players as well to self-reflect on their own performance, and that's come into the game an awful lot more as well. And it's definitely encouraged that they do that. So no, I don't look back and have any sort of regrets in relation to how things went. And how I dealt with it was I love training, so I would just train as hard when I was in and out of the team. It didn't bother me at all. I'd be one of those players who train how he would play. Depending on how you taught me as a player, that might not be very good on occasions, but that's how I would do. I have seen players just throw their toys out of the pram and just sulk, and that rarely ever works out for anybody, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's weird when you said there, where players say the manager doesn't like me. It's like, the manager doesn't care if he likes you or not. If you're going to win the game, he'll play you. Like,
exactly, if you're performing.
Yeah.
And you get that, and managers and even your own teammates. I've played in teams where I might not have gone on with my teammate, but I know when I go out on a Saturday, I want him to do well and he wants me to do well. So like you say, managers, coaches, if they might not get on with you personally, but professionally, they don't care as long as you're doing a job for the team. And you have to be professional about things. And no matter how you feel about things, you have to be professional, because that's what you're getting paid to do. And you're playing a sport that you absolutely love anyway and getting paid for it. Yeah. So I think there's no excuse at all whatsoever when players, you see some of these modern stories and players of like tweeting and not apologising, and I just see the egos are just ridiculous now, absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, and that's another new change to football, dealing with the egos of these players. These are players who are millionaires, before they even step on the pitch. So you're even questioning the motivation of some of them by the way that they act. Now, don't get me wrong. Those players who are there in that position deserve to be so, because they've worked extremely hard to get into that position. But when you see some of the horror stories of some players and with tweets and all that crack, it just does my head in, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
it really does.
Not big time. With the games that you played in the Premier League, what really struck you, or even who struck you as like, that is the top player of top players?
I was going to say that because Anto Breslin mentioned on the podcast when he was in Wolves, was around the time they brought in all the Portuguese lads, and they were all like Ruben Neves and all are his same age group, and he just said like it was a whole different ball game.
Yeah.
Was there kind of any player where you were like,
not to the extent probably. No, listen, there was some super players and that probably wouldn't be like, for instance, Dion Dublin. It made a huge impact when he came to the club, but not because of his technical ability, simply because of his presence and his goal scoring and also his character. You know, he was a good character to come in. Gary McAllister came in, and as a central midfielder, you look at him and think, wow, what a player! Like, you know what he could do. Quality and a good character again. Kevin Richardson, he'd won 2 league titles with Arsenal and Everton. He came in, he was at Villa beforehand, and he was coming to the end of his career, but even once again, how he was as a character was huge. And his influence on players around. So those types of players, there's some exciting players, some really good. I mean, there was a Brazilian lad who came to us, Isaias, and some of the stuff he would do with the ball is just absolutely ridiculous. Ridiculous. But you put him out on the pitch and off the ball stuff, oh my God. What's the point? Do you know what I mean? He wouldn't lift a finger out of possession, but get him the ball. And there was just no place for that. There's no place for that even now. But what he could do with the ball was like obscene. But without the ball, you're playing with 10 men, like that's it.
Yeah.
You know. So you kind of get instances like that, and it, I suppose, depends on the team that you're playing for as well. You know yourself, if you're playing for a top team, like when we played against Man United, and it was that period when Eric Cantona was signed for the club and the influence that he had on the pitch, but he had that aura about him. He just had that aura, and even the other Manchester United players would look at him as the main man, like, you know, and even to look around and see the likes of some of these Manchester United players who are household names, looking at Eric to go on. He went through a period of the season where he'd scored that winning goal and they'd win games 1-0, and they went on to win the league. And he was with him for 5 years. The only time they didn't win the league was that time he got banned for that outrageous kung fu kick on that supporter. But he had a massive influence, and you were asking, like, you know the players, just the presence on the pitch and what they could do. But the really top players, the really good players, made things effortless, and he made it look effortless.
Hold it there. If you haven't, make sure you check out www.fpms.ie to start your financial journey today.
But there was some great players. I'm very lucky. And Zola was another one. Zola was outstanding. His movement, his technical ability, and he was tiny, absolutely tiny. And it just makes you think, even now when you're looking at young players, like, and the game is definitely, I feel, changed. And even at looking at our League of Ireland boys, young boys now, you look at the teams that are doing well at the younger ages, 14s and 15s, they're normally filled with physical players who can get around the pitch, who are strong and difficult to actually, like, you know, dispossess. I mean, you look back at those Zolas, you look at your Messis, and you still kind of think and hope that, you know, there's still room for that real technical, absolute quality. Like, but look, Bellingham now. Bellingham's like built like an athlete.
The shithouse brick.
Isn't he?
Yeah,
Isn't he?
he's
He's a unit, but he's still an absolute quality player as well. Like, let's be honest about it. I just think it's changing a little bit more, where there's a lot more ready-made physical specimens of players rather than the more technical ones.
Were you on the pitch with Cantona and Zola and all these lads?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
That's
I mean, I
incredible.
played against Hullet, played against Huddle, Zola, Cantona, all those super players, and obviously all the United younger lads coming through as well. Chased around quite a few of them.
I was going to say, when you're going into one of them games, do you? I know you probably wouldn't admit it at the time, but looking back, do you think like you're beaten nearly going into some of them games just purely because of like a presence of a player like that?
Yeah, I think back then you had more of a sniff of getting the result, because the teams that you were playing against, even though they had so many great players, weren't so much possession based as they would be now. I mean, teams control games now for long periods of time.
That's a great point.
Even back then, the top teams would still be a little bit more direct and wouldn't be dominating it from a possession point of view. So you would have more of an opportunity of maybe nicking something and having a little bit more of the football as well. Whereas now, I think that's a lot more difficult.
I've seen that.
It's a great point.
There with about City, because I think Carragher was talking about it, saying you back when I keep saying when they were playing, like you'd get like a set piece on one of these teams, but then you look like City are the best at defending set pieces now, so it's you just kind of you don't have the ball for most of the game. Then you get the set piece, and they're the best team in the league at defending them. It's like they don't leave any room for error nowadays.
Well, this is the thing. That's why the game has moved on so much.
Yeah.
You wouldn't imagine somebody like Guardiola leaving any room for error, like, to be honest with you, and what he's done. And he's very humble about things. I just read a quote today on somewhere, whether it was on social media or a newspaper or something like that, talking about Bielsa. And he said if Bielsa managed Man City, he'd win everything. And if I managed Leeds, I wouldn't get him out of the Championship.
Oh wow, that's interesting.
So I thought it was an interesting comment for him, and he does come across, as being very, very humble. Loves what he does, and the success is there for him to see. So I just thought it was an interesting comment.
Very, because that's always the age-old debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
How good is Guardiola if he can't go down to Sheffield United and pull them out of the relegation zone?
Exactly. But I think people underestimate the job that you have to do
With top
players as well.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
To keep doing it year in, year out, it's not a fluke, and it's easy to say, he's got the best players, but you still have to be able to manage that. You still have to keep things in the background running smoothly. You got to try and keep all your players in the squad happy, and you're talking about world class players here as well, and you can't underestimate the job that he's done. It's been amazing.
Talk about egos, they have the biggest ones.
Oh yeah, no
you have to
doubt.
keep them on it.
That was one of the things he said. Like, egos are probably one of the bigger things that have changed now since like the 90s to the 2000s to the 2010s and all. What happened after Coventry then? So you've had 7 years in the first division. What's the next phase in your career?
So I left Coventry in '99 on a free. It was at Bosman. They'd offered me another contract, but it was just a token one because I wasn't even playing in the first team, and I think they wanted some money from me. Not that they would have gotten an awful lot. So I moved to Cardiff, who had just been promoted to the third tier, which was League One at the time, and I played there for 7 years, and that's where I kind of felt that, I held down a place. It was a real good period of Cardiff's history that I was a part of, and I was very lucky. We got 2 promotions. We got back up to the Championship. A lot of the seasons that I was there were winning seasons, whereas at Coventry it would have been a little bit different.
Touch and go.
So it's always nice to have that. And there was a lot of money spent at Cardiff at that time when Sam Haman had come in from Wimbledon. I don't know if you would know him, but he was a really flamboyant chairman back in the day. He was chairman of Wimbledon when they won the FA Cup, that famous final against Liverpool. And he came in and he invested a lot of money. He was very, very colourful. Brought a lot of very good players to the club. A lot of young players came up that went on to go on to the Premier League, and it was great to see those players. I went there when I was 24. I was there till I was 31, and I've seen a lot of young players develop there and go on into international players and go on and play in the Premier League. And played with a few internationals at the time, and it was a real good period for me in my career, where going from bit part player, going to playing regularly and in a decent winning side and getting 2 promotions, being part of that success was obviously great for me, and probably the best part of my football career was that period, I would say. Even though I might have played at a higher level, I think that was my most enjoyable period of my career.
Yeah, it's a huge message. What did you think were the main differences between Coventry or the level that you were playing at and then going down to, let's say, League One football with Cardiff? Was it tempo, physicality, technical ability, combination of all 3? It
wouldn't have been physicality. I think you probably need to be a little bit more physical down there. You get less time on the ball down there than you would in the Premier League. It's crazy, at the time. And even though the Premier League was hell for leather then, down the lower divisions, you get less time. You're getting pressed a lot quicker. There's a lot more work rate involved, and the technical ability isn't as good. And it's the final third stuff as well, and you're defending third. Defenders wouldn't have been as bright or as sharp or as dominant, and certainly the final third, that quality of getting one chance in the game and putting it away, or your hold up player bringing people into the game. It's not as clean. It's not, and the movement's a huge thing as well. You watch the top players in their movements. It's very clever. It's timed perfectly. And it's consistent as well. Where you go down the leagues, there's a lot more changeover for position and needless as well. That just comes down to the quality of the player.
And with your successful period at Cardiff, what was the next chapter from there, and where did the transition to coaching happen? Because like at 31, were you even thinking about coaching, or was it just about the playing days?
I always felt that I would stay in the game in some capacity. The coaching probably entered my head, but when you're playing, that's the sole focus. Not for everyone, but for me it was. So I moved to Hartlepool after Cardiff. Cardiff let me go when Dave Jones came in. When I was 31. So I went up and signed for Hartlepool, who were, I think they were in League 2. That's the 4th tier at the time. They signed me that season on a 3-year deal. We got promoted in the first season, so it was another promotion. So once again, I've gone from a good, successful, positive kind of experience, and then straight into the Hartlepool one, which was another good experience as well. So that was a successful move in my eyes at the time. And then the second season, I kind of started possibly thinking around then, getting to that age, what I would do next in football. I always didn't have any other plan. I did go back and do an access course in college and stuff like that. And I was possibly thinking of doing a sports science degree at the time. But I decided to probably go down the coaching route when I got injured in my 3rd season at Hartlepool, right at the start of the season. And that's when I started doing a little bit of work as well for the Hartlepool Academy. So I started doing a little bit of coaching there and started doing my badges with the FA in England. And then I had to finish playing football in my 3rd season because of an injury. And I continued doing a little bit of coaching with Hartlepool and in colleges. And then I went to Middlesbrough and spent a couple of years there, which was a really enjoyable experience, to be fair, because that's what you would call the Category 1 club over in England.
Oh, are they Cat 1? Oh,
Yeah.
really? Wow.
Yeah.
Jesus.
And the whole environment there, I felt was magnificent, and I think a lot of the stuff that I believe in, I kind of took away from there. Dave Parnaby was the head of youth there. I found him, a real interesting man to work with. I learned an awful lot in that environment, and the huge thing about working with kids and having coaches that are working with kids is to make sure you got the right people involved. That's huge. And having the right people involved goes a long way for you to gain success. And what I mean by the right people is having people who are hungry, enthusiastic, love it, have good relationships with kids. What I mean by that is their mannerisms towards kids. And I got that at Middlesbrough. I could see how it works and how it worked for the kids, and seeing the kids and how much they enjoyed it, and having a smile on their face, and really feeling like I really felt that environment was for me, it was a great learning environment for young players and young kids. And I found that, that's a takeaway for me. And the good thing I felt about Middlesbrough as well, they would have been in the area where you're probably competing with the likes of Newcastle and Sunderland for players up in that northeast, and it's got a history of producing really good players up around there. But what I did notice, what Middlesbrough did more than what Newcastle and Sunderland did, was they looked at the technical ability of a player probably more. That's not to say Newcastle and Sunderland didn't, of course it did, but you would see probably more of the smaller technical players at Middlesbrough, and they'd be a lot more patient with them. And I always felt when we played Sunderland and Newcastle, that was some small players, of course they would, but they would always look a little bit stronger at the younger ages. But then once you got to your 16s and 18s, you'd then see that Middlesbrough would normally come out on top against those teams, simply because of they looked at the long-term player rather than the here and now player. And that's kind of stuck with me. But obviously you have to move with the times and things change. But it's the one thing that I always look at. And I'm a little bit of a sucker for a small technical player as well, to be honest with you. That has never changed. But it's certainly one of the main things that I would look for, is how can you look after a ball.
Yeah. I definitely noticed that story hasn't changed in the last 3 years, I would say.
No.
In terms of how everything's managed in Middlesbrough at a Cat 1 club, obviously they do have the facilities and the resources, but when it comes to like the nitty gritty on like coach education, how do their leadership teams task you guys with managing Middlesbrough Football Club at the youth setup? Like, are you given set formations, exercises, or how do you manage that curriculum?
Yeah, so and that's something that I believe in. So There is a curriculum set out, and there'd be a cycle within that curriculum, which would go over 6 weeks periods. So you'd cover each aspect of it, and then you'd have a review where coaches and players would maybe have a meeting and just see what they can work on. You put all your sessions into like a PMA system, so they're recorded, so people can see it, and players can log on to that as well. All your games are recorded or put into that system as well. It's a centralised system that everybody has access to, and all the reports of players would be put into that system as well. So you've got an ongoing record of how players are developing. What I felt about it was, from a coach's and a player's point of view, it seemed like a lot of work for both that were involved, but for you to be a Cat 1 club, you had to go into tremendous detail of what you were trying to do, and obviously giving the player the best possible opportunity to improve as a player as well, and make sure that he's aware of where he's at and how he can improve. And it gives them ownership as well, because they've got to go on and do their homework, and they've got to go on and concentrate on making themselves better as a footballer. So from the coach's point of view, you'd have lead coaches who would be full time. So you'd have 3 phases. You'd have the foundation, the middle phase, and then the youth phase. And you'd have some part-time coaches within each age group, and you'd have a lead full-time coach who would be responsible for 2 age groups, and that starts from under 9s up to under 18s and under 23s. So your under 23 would be looked after, more or less your reserves. Under 18s would be looked after by one. Then you've got 16s, 15s would be put into one, 14s, 13s, and so on downwards. And you'd have meetings and you'd chat about players. And obviously, as we all know, the unfortunate side of football is when players have to get released from clubs, and they're the most difficult decisions that people have to make, and there's a lot of chat and a lot of meetings about that, and a lot of things taken into consideration, and that's all part of the process as well, and all that is recorded each year. So if anybody comes back to you and say, well, listen, this is what we've done, this is what we advised for the player to try and improve on, and this is the end result.
Visibility at all steps.
Yeah.
I was going to say, because we would get kind of a decent amount of people watching or listening who would be kind of working even in community clubs, as well as maybe more kind of elite, so to speak, clubs. I hate that word, but and they might have something where they're trying to maybe move a kid to either even just a lower team in a community club or whatever the decision is. What kind of advice would you give to the coach about what's the best way to approach that kind of conversation? Yeah,
it's difficult. I think clarity at the start of the season is very important. That when you're sitting down with parents within your team to explain that this is a process, and what we're trying to do is, at this moment of time, that we feel that these set of players are the right set of players for this level. That may change as the season commences, and we can maybe have a look at it again halfway through the season. But what you're ultimately trying to do is you're trying to find the right level for the player. And sometimes parents want to push players into a certain level where the kid feels uncomfortable. And what happens then is he loses confidence. He doesn't enjoy it. And then all of a sudden, you're looking for something else rather than just looking at what the actual situation is.
Of course.
Your kid's probably not playing at the right level.
Yeah.
Just for now. But what you need to do is make sure that kid's going to be able to play with confidence. And how is he going to play by confidence? By getting success. How is he going to get success? By making sure that he's playing at the right level. If he's not, and he's he's falling behind and he's going into his shell a little bit, and people can sense that and see that, and that's where the communication has to come with the parent. And you have a chat with the parent and you explain, listen, this is what I'm noticing, this is what I'm seeing. I just wanted to chat to you and let me know what you think. How is he in himself? Is he enjoying coming to training? Is he enjoying coming to games? So you've set him off at the start by saying, listen, this is just what we think right now. That might change. Then if you're feeling a little bit like, little Johnny isn't really, performing or enjoying it as much, then you can have a chat with the parent, and then you come to an agreed outcome. Do we give him the rest of the season and then relook at it, or do we give him the opportunity to play and get more game time and get more success at maybe possibly one of the lower teams in the team? And I think if you set that out at the start with the parents, then you've already crossed that bridge and given yourself an opportunity to speak to the parent and to say, listen, I think Johnny now isn't enjoying his football. He's not impacting games as much as he would like to do. Let's see if we can find him a more suitable level. And if it's difficult with the parent, then you might have to just relook at it at the end of the season. But I think if a parent wants the kid's best interest and he wants his kid to enjoy, or she wants his kid to enjoy football, you should probably put him at a more suitable level.
Mm-hmm. The honesty side of it is definitely the only thing you can go at it. But I've often found, even with my experience as well, that sometimes it's just so difficult that like the player just has like the wrong expectation of themselves, which is mirrored by the parent as well, who has this false perception. And I've sat in rooms like that where you're just speaking to the wall sometimes, and they also feel that they're speaking to the wall as well, because obviously we only have opinions and stuff. But like those sorts of things never change. I don't think they will ever change, but it's definitely, I think it's going to be very important now in the next couple of years that, especially in younger age groups around like 6s, 7s and 8s, that there's way more of a clear pathway of communication with parents and players. But like, what do you think from working or coming back to Ireland really? And I suppose we can segue this from going from Middlesbrough back to Ireland, because you went from being a manager of 2 age groups in Middlesbrough to then becoming a director of football, if I'm not mistaken, in Limerick. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And how does that transition even work, and what would you recommend there as best practices?
Well, I made a few mistakes there, to be fair, which I've learned from myself. I think once I came back to Limerick, which it's not going to be the same setup, of course it's not. So you try, and what I did at that time was trying to implement certain things which probably weren't realistic as well. You can't go from being there to up there straight away. You need to find steps to get there, and making sure that people are on board with that. And ultimately, there's some great people that I worked with down in Limerick. The biggest mistake I made down in Limerick was I was too micromanaging, too much. And it's something that I look back at and think I should have done a lot less of that, because even though you're trying to obviously improve players and produce players, you want to give your coaches room to impose themselves and for them to learn as well. And what I found I did down in Limerick too much was get involved too much in the dressing room and on match days, and that undermines the manager and coach straight away. And I felt that I would know better than the managers and coaches, which is not always the case. It's not always the case. And that's an area where I felt, and I look back at and think, I didn't do it all the time, but I did it on occasions, and I wish I didn't. And we had that fair element of success for Limerick. And to be honest with you, when I was there, and Tommy Barrett was under 19 manager when I went there. He's now first team manager at 13. Got on really well with Tommy. And there was some good young coaches there as well. But what you're trying to implement is the core values and a philosophy, and try to implement some sort of curriculum into it as well. But looking back, I think I should have given the coaches and managers a little bit more freedom, a little bit more leg room to impose themselves, as long as they're in the perimeters of what we're trying to do as a club. And I certainly don't do that anymore, as the boys know. I certainly
Thankfully.
don't.
No, big time.
Yeah, I give loads of space to the managers and coaches, and some people would say my impact on what they do is minimal, but I always like to plant little seeds here and there that hopefully they will pick up on and implement. But I certainly wouldn't be going over there to the dugout or telling them what to do or to make a change. I stay well away from it. I watch the game and I'll have a chat. Might not be till the next Friday, or it might be the Monday. Some managers will ring me up and ask me how they think the game went. And I'll give my input onto it. And we're forever chatting and talking about players. I'll forever ask questions. I think the managers and coaches don't actually realise how much I talk to them about teams and players, because they are given the freedom to go and express themselves and do it. And it's been successful for us in regards to how teams have done and how the coaches and managers have progressed. That's a big thing for me as well, is to encourage that sort of progression as well, not just the players, but having a tight-knit group of coaches is very important for the club as well. And I feel that we have that, and we've had that. You always get your one or two that you don't fit into to what we're trying to do. But ultimately, what I try to impose is freedom within the boundaries of what we're trying to do. If that makes sense.
I actually have a great example of this in Marley Park one of the days. Would have been 15, so me and Foxy were standing there staring at a tactics board, and we were playing a certain shape and we were trying to press a certain way, and whatever we were kind of deliberating over. He thought something, I thought something.
Was this in a game? Sorry.
No, this is just before a session
Oh,
started.
sorry.
So we were there, the lads weren't arrived yet. And Willie obviously come over, and I think Shane kind of had asked him his thoughts on it. He went, why don't you just do this? Or what? Well, he didn't say why don't you. He said, here's an option. And then he said it. And then straight away Foxy was like, yeah, no, that's the one. Like, and then we went straight with that for the rest of the year, and it was actually quite successful. But it's, like you said, it's not. And this is a big thing, I think, for coaches as well. If you are the way you said previously, where it's you're kind of changing things, or you want to, I think you give a manager an out where, like, if you make a mistake in a game, you can go, well, sure, he was the one telling me to do that. Whereas on the flip side, it actually puts more responsibility, I find, on the manager, where you know that your decisions are yours, and you kind of have to live with them, because everybody, to be fair, loves to have someone else to blame sometimes in football.
That's and you're right, and the managers will take that out as well. By the way. They will do, but it's so important and for young managers and coaches to be able to make those decisions and having that freedom. And I have the confidence in the boys as well, total confidence in what they do. And sometimes you'll see things and you feel that maybe you could have changed that or do that, but it's always good when you're standing back and watching it. It's easy to make those decisions. It's having the experience now, and our boys have that experience now of actually standing in the midst of a game, watching it. And the great thing about some of the guys is that they'll ask questions all the time, and they'll constantly keep asking, and that's how you learn, you know. And I'm not the be all and end all. I don't know everything by any stretch of the imagination. I like watching the boys work, and some of the tactical stuff that they do is like, oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. And going back to what you said a while ago about formations and styles of play, if you look at some of our teams, there's a contrast in how they play. The 20s and 17s are kind of lining up a little bit now on how they play. All the teams are encouraged to play through the thirds. That's paramount. But I mean, if you watch our 15s, last year we had 3 really good strikers, and we wouldn't be playing long, slow build up. We would be looking to say, can we get the ball up to those strikers with quality, whether that's 1, 2, 3 passes. And some people would say, well, that's quite direct. Well, it's not. It's playing forward with a purpose, and you're playing into your good players, your strikers. We have good players throughout the team, but we had 2 or 3 strikers who.
Yeah, it's rare to have one. He had alone 3.
Yeah, you know, so you're looking, and the formation that they played with 2 up top as well. It would depend on what other teams did. If other teams are pressing us high up the park and they're leaving us 2v2 at the back, still playing out from the back if you play the ball into the area and it gets to the striker's feet. And the 20s would have more deliberate. The 17s last year controlled a lot of their football, and defensively they might play a mid-block. And so all the teams are given the freedom to play whatever formation they want, because it's extremely important for players to experience different formations. I totally understand why some teams have all their teams playing a certain way, because if they go to the first team. But I think from a learning experience for players to really, be educated and to develop as footballers, I think it's more important that they're tried in different positions and tried in different formations. It's not about winning. Not for us. Well, listen, it is, but it's not paramount. Players go out there wanting to win. Coaches and managers go out there wanting to win. I'm happy when I see players develop and go on into our first team and go to England or get international caps. That's progress for us as a club as well. Like,
the one system in a club is interesting. I always find it's very it's kind of like Ajax always do 4-3-3, so we'll do it. But the culture of football in countries is so different. Like Ajax have one of the most historic clubs in the world, so there's a reason obviously they do that. And I find sometimes clubs now are just trying to copy and paste that, but you can't copy and paste the previous 80 years of culture in Holland, let's say, as an example, or obviously Spain is another one like that. I'd be very much aligned with you, where it's, again, you could go to first team managers now, even let's say in English football, change every 2 years. So you're someone who has only ever played in one position in one system, and then you get to the first team eventually, and all of a sudden Conte comes in, it's a 3-4-3.
Yeah,
you've never played in it, so
it's not first principles thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think? Now, I've been out of team coaching for only 2 or 3 years now, but what do you think UCD Mount Marion have done very well from 14s, 15s, and then into the 17s, 20s, first team? Because, like, from the outside when I was there, this is when it was like the start of your tender, and we were just starting with the 13s National League, for example. And it's a different, like, the League of Ireland's different entirely now from when I was there, but, like, I still obviously have a finger on the pulse with what's going on, but, like, it's evident from back in the 90s to now that UCD are still producing players. What is the club doing well? And I'd said UCD Mount Marion as well, because when I was originally there with the Mount Marion link, I wouldn't say it was frowned upon, like, from the Irish football nature, but it was definitely a weird one compared to other clubs and partnerships. But it's quite evident that even with that, like with Dan Babb going to Ipswich, like, even that is a fruitful relationship. Could you just talk a little bit about what's going on and what's going really well in both sides of that coin?
Yeah, I mean, the Mount Marion side of things, you know, historically, you wouldn't put them up there as being one of the bigger clubs in Dublin. I get what you're saying, and some people still look at that. And it's work in progress, and, you know, there's a few, you know, challenges within that in relation to other sports. You know, you got really big clubs.
Yeah,
and
huge.
really big schools around the area in other sports that, you know, a lot of our better players, you know yourself, a good player normally in one sport is probably excelling in another.
Yeah, well, there's a huge rugby culture in South Dublin as well.
Rugby and GA as well, obviously. So we have to contend with those challenges. Obviously, as you mentioned there, maybe not being renowned as a big club, but there's certainly been improvements in relation to how teams are performing and the levels that they're playing at. And we're also getting players into the League of Ireland set up now. If you're a Mount Marion player and you're on the same level as a player on the outside or even a little bit below, you've got a better chance of getting into the UCD setup, and that's why the link is there. It's important, and that's why clubs have links.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we certainly wouldn't be putting a player into the environment just for the sake of it, just because he needs to be able to be at the level. And as you mentioned there about Dan Babb was a really late signing for us under 15s, and I have to thank Paul McDonald for that, because he was his manager at Mount Marion, and he'd been away for a year or so he's kind of he was under the radar. And it was COVID and all that kind of crack going on as well, and he came up for one training session, and I'd seen him once or twice now, and he had caught the eye, but nowhere near enough of him to say, you know, this is a decent player, like, you know.
Yeah.
And he came up and trained with the boys, and he'd never played right back before, and we were kind of looking at positionally wise where he could possibly fit in. He was always an attacking player, and he impressed the guys, he impressed me, and he was our last signing right before the window. I think it might have been a week or two, and he came into the environment, and he was, you know, a great kid, super kid, great attitude about him, really laid back, humble boy, worked hard, loved his football, and came in and did really well, and technically very, very good. And straight away, once I seen what he was like technically, I was sold to him straight away. Like, you know, so yeah, he's a player that came from Mount Marion, and there's been quite a few more. The current under 15s had 5 or 6 lads who came from Mount Marion into the setup, and there's a few dotted around in the 20s and the 17s now. We brought another couple in this season, so that link is certainly getting stronger in relation to producing players for League of Ireland, but also the teams that are being left behind are competing, you know, at Premier League level now, whereas in the past that wasn't the case. So it looks more promising now, getting players through that. So if you have any aspirations of playing with UCD, getting yourself into the Mount Marion setup would be a very wise move at an earlier stage, because you also get access to League of Ireland coaches who will come down and watch games and take sessions, and you'll be asked to go and train with the League of Ireland teams as well. You're getting more exposure to it, and that link has got stronger, and we're always continuing to try and make it as strong as possible.
Yeah, amazing. It's definitely taken leaps and bounds. And what I'm being honest here as well, it's probably one of the longer standing relationships in the National League. When you look at other clubs have parted ways, got back with other clubs. Yeah. It's like Love Island, like it's a bit bizarre.
Let's
like.
go for a chat.
Yeah, no, it's definitely it's a weird environment, you know, but it's definitely one of the ones that has been fruitful because you're just giving it time to grow. Kind of similar to your director of football style now, just like allowing things to prosper, not getting too involved with it. On the National League side of things, there's obviously been a lot of promotion of coaches, and even from Shane going into the first team as the assistant, and then obviously there's a lot of player progression. Like at the core, what is the club doing really well at underage level?
Well, I think if we look at, from a recruitment point of view, and from a promotion point of view, from players going from 20s into first team. And let's be honest about things here. It's always been easier for players to progress into the first team at UCD simply because of the model. Because it's like students only and you're not bringing in players from outside, then you automatically do look to get young players in there. So in that regard, that helps. That helps my role an awful lot. But I do think now that the type and quality of player that we've got, like in the 20s and 17s and even in the 15s and 14s, there's some really, really good, promising technical players who you feel can progress. I think the coaching and the environment within the club is very, very good as well. I think the whole environment that we've got right now is a real good, positive learning environment. The mannerisms of the whole club as well, you can feel it. It's definitely a controlled, positive environment. We're producing players for the first team. We're producing players that are getting sold to England, to Italy, to other places in Europe. We're getting boys into international teams. I'm actually a bit disappointed that we haven't had more, if I'm totally honest with you. And it's a stick that other clubs use to beat us with when they're trying to bring players in. And I feel that we certainly should have had more players get being internationally recognised over the last 2 or 3 years. I feel that we've got some super players in the club that haven't been given the opportunity that they should have. But that'll come. Looking back at my career, I don't look at my under 15s and 16s caps. I certainly don't. I haven't even spoke about them, have I?
I didn't know you were captain, Rich, if I'm being honest. I just knew the first team thing.
And that's what you got to look. You create 15, 16 international. How many of those move on through at 18s, 21, first team players develop at different stages, and it's going back to the Middlesbrough model. I feel that a lot of our players might progress a little bit further on down the line, and that's what we're hoping for. And that's why I think 14s and 15s we have got players that we're hoping will do that in 17s and 20s. There's always going to be changes, and I say that to parents at the start of each season. And what I would say as well, I think we're honest and consistent in how we act towards players and speak to parents. We, as a group and as a club, we don't really talk about other clubs. We just talk about ourselves. We try and keep things honest, open, straight and narrow. Keep our side of the pack clean, as I say, and build up a good trustworthy group of coaches and managers that we've got that parents can trust. We don't promise players scholarships or anything like that under 14s and 15s, but it's a prize at the end of the road if you do well, and that's another added bonus we have as a club. Is the educational side of things, that there is scholarships available if you've been successful enough within our ranks and done well. And there's also the opportunity of when other clubs come in for you, we're not going to put huge barriers up against you. We'll promote and encourage the fact that you move on, whether that's to another League of Ireland club or whether it's across water. I feel we've got the best model in Irish football for young players, and we'll continue to work on what we're doing and keep trying to improve things.
Yeah, it's a very good overview. And then finally, I think it's always good to get an insight into the decision makers in Irish football. What do you really look for in a player? Like, it's obviously evident that the technical based footballer is not the be all and end all, but definitely like the holy grail. But what do you really look for in a player? Let's say they're on trial and they're trying to get into a 14s, 15s, 17s or 20s team.
Yeah, it's difficult when you're watching players for one training session or a trial basis. Sort of
Yeah,
thing.
well, that is very true. Yeah.
You need to have. You probably need to have more of an idea of the player that you're dealing with from watching him. References are always important as well.
Interesting.
Character, what's he like amongst the group? What's he like on the pitch? I always like to referee our in-house games so I can hear what the players are like on the pitch.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, when they're talking to each other, the information they're giving, or also how they're reacting after like another player does something, makes a mistake. What's his reaction like? And also the ongoing information that's been given to players, and it's interesting once you get in amongst it what players are like on the pitch, because you don't really get that from the sideline. So things I look for: technical ability, definitely, in possession, movement, awareness, depending on the position. Obviously some of the physical aspects come into it as well. Out of possession is a big one in relation to how to react out of possession. Not so much just in the transitions, but in general. Are they somebody who's got a good attitude to work hard as well? And they're just a handful of things that you would look at. Awareness as well, decision making, final third stuff for your strikers. The movement is a big one for me, and obviously, holding the ball up technically, what are they like? Movement off the ball. I like footballers who are clever, first and foremost, and that's just not like having a good touch or a good pass, but it's also adapting to different situations. And the character is a huge thing. Very hard to judge someone's character off watching them play until you actually get them in the building.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
But when you hear about certain players, like for instance the 17s last year, who went on to win the National League, had some great characters in that group, really good characters. And I think some of those characters that came into the club as well really brought the level up in relation to how they're going to approach things, and really give a belief as well to the group as well. And there was a great mix. And at the end of the season, obviously, it was very successful for them to end up winning it. And that's because I feel, not because collectively we had the best group of players, but I certainly thought that from a team point of view, of all the aspects of it, the hard work, the organisation, the goal scoring prowess of you up top as well was a huge aspect. But the characters within the group as well, they really had a great camaraderie, and characters are huge in football. They really do make a team, because you can have a team of 8, 9 good footballers, really, really good footballers, and you might have a so-called average footballer but has an amazing character. He'll bring them to another level simply because of who he is and the character that he brings to it. It's a big thing. Big thing.
That's even evident. You were saying about like Eric Cantona, for example, like he's obviously the epitome of character, but ability, like that is obviously potentially like the perfect scenario. But I think it's probably just a good message to young players as well that, you might not need to be the best footballer, but there is a lot more at stake for your role in a club or team, because your personality definitely has like a huge weight.
Definitely, and I speak about it on occasions within the age groups about, who's the characters in your group, who's leading by example, who's, when you're doing your drills, who's pushing it rather than the coach. You see those guys saying, come on, this is going to be quicker, this is going to be better, rather than the coaches saying that. And that raises the tempo and the attitude to training as well, and that becomes infectious, because other lads then will look at him thinking, well, he's doing that, I need to do it just as well. That's what you need that group. So yeah, characters would be a big one for me, but obviously, as you said, he might not have to be the best player in the world, but he needs to be able to play at that level as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, other than that, I think I'm all good, Gary.
To finish, yeah.
Yeah, nice way to finish. Thanks for your time, Willie. That was amazing.
Cheers, guys. I appreciate it, and nice to see you again, Gareth.
Yeah.
When you coming back in?
Between the calls with him all the time, honestly, I had to be back one day. I said it to Shane Fox in the Viva last year, and I said it to him as well. I got to be back at some stage.
Yeah, we have that now on camera
Yeah.
as well. There we go.
No, I said it, so that's fair.
Top man. Oh, enjoyed it. Cheers for having me, lads.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.